Hey folks, welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Carlos, it's good to see you, my man. How you doing?
It's great. I'm glad you could squeeze me in between your basketball palooza, Sean. You've been writing every single day about basketball. You're hunting through the internet, Twitter, MySpace, anywhere you can find any morsel of basketball news, because it's basketball season, of course, around here, hot and heavy. So thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's not basketball though; it's the Pistons specifically, and I don't remember the last time that the news cycles required us to write about the Pistons this often. And in terms of hunting on Twitter, I mean, Isaiah Thomas, you don't have to hunt far, do you, to find him trying to defend himself, defend the bad boys, take down the young guys these days. It's just it's really something. We can get into him in a minute, but the Pistons have made some news recently, and I'm not talking about almost setting a franchise record for losses. They were 17 and whatever it was. I can't remember how many wins they actually had. 17 wins.
17 and 65.
That sounds right. That's 82. Yes, you're the mathematician. You're the smart one in this podcast. But they were a game away from setting an all-time record for franchise, or tying an all-time record for franchise losses. And Carlos, let me ask you this, because they have that record. I think they won 20 games the season before, or maybe 20 the two seasons before, and 22 or 23. Anyway, you add up the 3 years that Troy Weaver's been the general manager, and you think about how many losses Dwayne Casey had, and yet yesterday, or let's just say earlier in the week, Troy Weaver met with the media to talk about the end of the year and potentially what he wants in a coach. And Dwayne Casey was there, and he spoke before Troy Weaver. So here you have a coach who resigned / was probably gently asked to go up to the front office, although Dwayne Casey and Troy Weaver both insisted it was Dwayne Casey's decision.
Oh, yeah.
In any
Kumbaya.
case, and yeah, right. In any case, here you've got Troy Weaver coming into Dwayne Casey's press conference, standing up with him, putting his arm around him, talking about him taking bullets and what he's meant to the franchise. You just don't see that very often at all when you've got a 3-year record. I mean, I understand why he did it, and the players really like Casey, and he's got a long track record of developing young guys, and so maybe that's smart in the long run to keep him around as somebody that you can talk to and call upon and go sit in the office and that sort of thing. But can you recall a situation where a coach loses that much, and first of all, he even has a press conference, and secondly, then the GM comes and kind of talks about him the way Weaver does? It's an odd deal a little bit. I was curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's usually a clean break, right? I mean, you're done. It's you're out the door as a coach. You don't usually have this kind of a soft landing. And I don't really understand it. I mean, I know what Troy said and all that stuff, the bullets, and it's hard to win 20 games, and kind of, I guess saying that when you have injuries and some deficits, and he was very professional about it. Dwayne Casey is a really good guy. I mean, he's respected throughout the league. He's great with the media. He's great with the players. No question. Was coach of the year at one point in Toronto, right? So there's no question. But when your winning clip is 315 over 5 years, I'm not exactly sure what kind of fount of knowledge exactly you think you're going to get out of this guy, or what. I mean, how old is he? He's kind of in his early
65.
65. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. Is he just, they consider him a great basketball mind? And we don't know the exact depth of their personal relationship. Maybe Casey has helped Weaver in ways that we don't exactly understand all the time. And I will say that one thing you can say about the Pistons through all this losing is they have been professional. They kept together. Nobody's been lashing out. There's been no weird, drama in the locker room and on the court. It hasn't spilled over, and people complaining about playing time and this and that and the roles. So, if you don't see any drama, that doesn't just happen when you have a team that wins 17 games. There's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of problems, a lot of, things going on behind the scenes when a team loses that much. So I can't recall. I'm sure there's a case of this. I'm not sure locally, if I can think back far enough of when they decided, hey, we're going to soft landing, we're going to kick the guy upstairs, and maybe he can help out in other ways. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly weird, and they had to. We were questioning this season, right? I mean, what was going to happen if he didn't win bigger or whatever. But the Cade Cunningham injury early in the season was such a complicating factor. So they probably made the move. It was unfortunate for Casey. They didn't have his number one guy, but they probably made the move that was right. It's not like he was going to like suddenly start winning at a huge clip probably next year. So it was time.
Well, and the other thing too is if you think about the longer game, even if they did improve next year with Casey, which if they're healthy, I'm sure they will, or I'm sure they would have. At that point, he's 66. It's the end of his contract. How much longer is he going to coach anyway, right? So why not start that process now? And it's interesting. Troy Weaver said in his his season-ending press conference that one of the things that stuck out about the season to him was the early West Coast, was relatively early when they went on a West Coast trip, and it was a 6-game trip. And I don't remember if they won more than one game. I know they beat Golden State. Sadiq Bey hit a prayer from 35 feet at the buzzer to win it. But he mentioned that they were in every game, and they were. And I do remember thinking, and this is after they lost Cunningham, but they still had just about everybody else, if I'm not mistaken, especially Bojan Bogdanovic, who was their leading scorer this year, who they did not have, down the stretch for at least a month. But I do remember at that time thinking, wow, these guys are showing a little bit of fight, even though they're losing. And that was without Cunningham. But to me, the problem was, Carlos, eventually, and you can also say, okay, they lost Bogdanovic, Burks went down. I mean, they were without 6 rotation players by the end. But, I don't think that kind of fight was consistent enough in the second half of the season, right? Especially defensively. Now, again, and way in here, but young teams in the NBA just don't defend well. I mean, San Antonio, and I use this as an example because the NBA is just a little different and tricky this way, but they're led by one of the best coaches of this generation, and Greg Popovich, and that team gave up 50% from the floor and from the field on the season. And this is a Popovich, right? So they were one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA too. And to Casey's point, and even Weaver's point to a degree, you just don't win with young teams in the NBA, and you really don't defend. So I know a lot of the fan base was frustrated with how they played defense, but I do think there were some nights that they just didn't compete. There weren't that many of them, but there were enough that kind of made you wonder. Dwayne Casey was talking about, hey, they probably need a new voice, And yeah. I thought that showed some pretty good self-awareness, right? That they could benefit from that.
I mean, it's I don't want to get off on, I don't want to pull a Sean Windsor and start talking about my sport, but like Jeff Blashill, right? That was the question. Was he was competent, he was well liked and respected, but when they were getting their teeth kicked in, often enough that you figure, is his message getting through? Is that competition, that nightly competition, is it still there? And that's exactly what you're saying is that going to carry over? Is he going to be able to instill that even when all the Sean Windsor, moons and stars align and they get that guy from France, that you're scared about too much media coming in and kicking you out of your premium seats, floor seats for Sean Windsor.
No, not floor seats. Right now we're in the upper lower bowl, but we get we're going to be up in the rafters where we sit. We'll be in the hockey press box.
You'll be across the street at the garage. So I mean, it makes sense on the age thing. You're exactly right. And then it's not like people were. I don't think reading some comments on our stories. I don't think not one person was like, "Damn it, you should have kept Dwayne. He was 1 year away from turning this thing around." Everybody was ready for it to happen.
They were. The fan base was ready to go, and the coach is always going to get the first blame, right? And the coaches. I mean, in any sport, a coach matters. Yeah. Obviously in the NBA, the coach doesn't matter quite as much as say college basketball, or nowhere near as much as college basketball or football, right? But
right.
But you could argue about baseball and hockey, but the coach does matter in the NBA for sure. I just think it was just an accumulation, right? That was part of it too. Like if you just had this year, then the fans base and even maybe the organization, you and I would be saying, okay, look, you don't lose your best player in a basketball court and not have it feel exponential. I mean, I wrote about that a little bit. It's not. I mean, obviously, maybe you lose your quarterback in football. It's a similar kind of thing. But, you lose your best player in basketball, who also happens to handle the ball as a primary ball handler. You're really going to feel that. It's going to ripple out. You don't just lose his points. You don't just lose the numbers, right? The production and the stat sheet. You lose organization. You lose a certain amount of swag. You lose a certain amount of competitive spirit. Troy Weaver talked about also, losing Isaiah Stewart, who is not a great player by any stretch, but he is one of the guys that competes every single night, and that takes a toll. So if this year had come in a vacuum, I think we would be a lot more willing to say, right, look at what they lost. Of course they're going to sink. But the problem is it's coming off the previous 2 years, right? Now, real quickly, and I'm curious, again, what you think here. What's odd is that other than, Killian Hayes got a little bit better, although he fell off again. But he did, to Troy Weaver's point, he did have guys on the all-rookie team each of the last 3 years. And some of the young guys did get better. I mean, even Isaiah Stewart was better this year before he got shut down with an injury. But Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey really got better. So how much is that just those guys? They're wired that way? How much of that is Wayne Casey? Do you look at the larger record of when he was in Toronto and had a bunch of young guys and they all got considerably better and turned into a playoff team? I mean, does he get any credit for that at all? Or is it going to take the franchise winning and then it'll be a retroactive thing where you look back and say, well, he did help start some of those guys on their path? What do you think?
He should get some credit, but I mean, basketball is such a talent-based sport. There's coaching involved and development, but kind of, you are who you are as a shooter. If you can hit the outside shot, if you can dunk, if you can defend, all these things, you can obviously get better. But it's kind of your profile is your profile. I think a little bit about that comment and some of the comments. I think it was Casey himself who made those comments about this is a great place. For a coach to come, it's desirable, whatever. That's the Zillow listing, man. That's the hey, fixer. It's got potential. It's a cute fixer upper. You can, in the NBA. I mean, this is why you love basketball. Is always peddling hope and potential and all that. And I'm glad in your column you did mention that, by the way, that this team has potential. It has Cade and Ivey and Duren, and that is something. Young players, that is potential. But how tired are people in Detroit?
As I wrote, right? I call it a dirty word. Yeah, right. I mean, and it's not just if you're just a Pistons fan, you're sick of it. But if you're a Detroit sports fan in general, you're really sick of it, right? Because it's everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
and this is not. I mean, but let me ask you that: how desirable is this? Take your Sean Windsor, unofficial mayor of Detroit hat on off. How desirable really is this? Because potential's one thing, but you don't have LeBron, you don't have John Morant, you don't have some of these Steph. You don't have any superstars on this team. Any guy like Cade hasn't really proven anything yet. Potential hasn't proven anything. So what do you have right now that really makes this a desire? Is it a desirable job?
Well, it absolutely is, but it is not Steve Kerr going to the Warriors in 2015, taking over from Mark Jackson,
right?
Where you're taking over a young team, but it just got into the second round of the playoffs, right?
Right.
And taking the Spurs to 6 games, and Curry and Thompson are in their, I don't know, what were they, in their mid-20s at that point or whatever, and dropping 40 against one of the great teams of that era. And this is not that. Could it be that? No. Look, I'm not saying there's Steph Curry on this team or LeBron, as you say, or even Ja. However, what's Jaden Ivey's ceiling, right? What's Cade Cunningham's ceiling? I mean, Jalen Duren, as Paul George, the all-star forward for the your team, the Los Angeles Clippers, said on a podcast recently, right? This guy. I mean, you can hear he was talking about his grown man strength and his intensity and all these other things. So you can hear other players just sort of randomly talking about some of the guys on the Pistons right now. Some of the young guys, the three young guys basically on the Pistons unprompted. And that's the thing, and that's what coaches know. They don't care about what the other players say, but they know, so they see. The difference is, I mentioned that Warriors team. I'm trying to think of another example where a coach comes in with a team that's about ready to win. These guys aren't quite ready to win, right? But Thompson and Curry were probably 25 when Kerr took over, 24, maybe 25. Maybe Thompson was 24 and Curry was 25, and Green was probably right in that area, Draymond.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference, though, a huge difference still between 21 and 24, right? That's 3 years, and that's a long, long time, right? And fans are sort of fed up with that, right? But it really is going to take another few years before we see what these guys truly are as players. But it's hard to ask a fan base to be patient when it's already, what's it feel like, a decade-long rebuild or longer.
Well, that was the disappointing part about Casey's. You figured this is a veteran coach who's gotten close to a title, with a really good team, and maybe he's the difference, And you're coming off of Stan Van Gundy too, really respected veteran coach. Maybe they need to go the other way with a younger guy who's gonna kind of develop with I don't know. Maybe it's hard to say what they need exactly, but it was so. Casey looked and sounded like the right guy, and it didn't work out. But I don't know where you go here. But I just don't. I don't know. I don't see this. I mean, like you said, they haven't won. I mean, they have not. This team does not know how to win. And
Mm-hmm.
all sports is about potential and ceilings and all this. And this is why other teams like to talk about it, because it's easy to talk about things that haven't happened. Oh yeah, this guy's going. Jeff Okuda is going to be the next. Hall of Fame. He has Hall of Fame potential. Just say whatever you want. Nobody's ever going to hold you to it. People love these kind of little, snippets and, talking points that are, this guy thinks he's great. Yeah, sure. Ceiling potential. And when it's not met, nobody really cares. So I think that, right now, if you're a coach coming into the situation, I'd be scared. I would not want to come to the Pistons. If I was a top flight, top end, higher, this would not be probably my choice, because you've got to, and it's one thing, and I don't know. I mean, they talked about when they're going to hire a coach that there's no timetable on it, but they certainly got to hire one before the draft, right? Or can they wait after the draft and see if they get, Wembanyama, that maybe that'll change things for a coaching search?
Well, the lottery will be while the playoffs are going on. So, and this is a year where if you win the lottery, you kind of know who's coming, right? So, I would think they would wait. I mean, they would hire a coach before the draft, no question. Yeah. But no, I think you asked. I didn't really answer the question you asked me earlier. Because we were talking about the difference between 21, 22-year-old guys and 24, 25-year-old guys, and it's a huge difference. But, and I wrote this, and I think this is true. A few years ago, when Weaver drafted Killian Hayes, Sadiq Bey, or Isaiah Stewart and Sadiq Bey, I think that was the order. And then they showed a little bit of something as rookies, not Killian, not Hayes, excuse me, but Bey and Stewart did. But I don't remember at any point around here, or even in the NBA world at large in the country, people thinking those were 3 future All-Stars, right? That was never the case. But that's that's what NBA people think the potential is for all 3 of Duren, Cunningham, and Ivey. And that's the difference. And that's why this job is absolutely very attractive. And then you add in
they probably thought that about Darko, by the way, but yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. As soon as people saw Darko play, it was kind of like, what? Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you got a year of tape on all 3 of these guys now.
Yeah.
And not only that, you saw them get better. You saw Cunningham get better a year ago, and how he could at times control the game. And then the way Ivey, Duren too, but the way Ivey got better, I think it surprised people, because he started doing things that were not in the scouting report. There were lots of questions about him at draft time, and his improvement. And I think what you've got are 3 guys that are competitive and work, and so that's half of it too. But as Weaver said, look, coaches understand what they're looking at, and they do. So it's going to be a very, very attractive job. With the facilities, the fact that it's one of the, outside of New York and Boston and LA, it's one of the next tier sort of
Chicago.
NBA franchises. I think that helps a little bit. They were 10th in attendance this year. I mean, I was at a game a couple of weeks ago where they played the Miami Heat, and it was here they are at that point. They won 16 games, and it was sort of shocking. Well, not really, but still, it is when you see it. Even though you know intellectually this is a really good basketball town, it was surprising how loud it was, right? And that's another thing. So it's a great fan base. And do you remember how it was at the Palace when they were rolling? I mean,
yeah.
it was the best crowd, one of the best 2-3 crowds in basketball. And so all those things I think help a little bit too. It's just, I don't know. Maybe if you've got Udoka or some of the other top candidates, and Wembanyama goes to Charlotte or goes to Washington D.C., that's where they want to go. That I guess that's possible. You want a chance at a talent like that. But that comes with its own kind of pressure too, right? And the coach that takes over that kind of player rarely stays. It's like, do you remember who coached LeBron when he was a rookie? Actually, Mike Brown. He's a Sacramento Kings coach. He's a good coach, but when you come in that early, you don't usually get to see. It's like Scotty Brooks, who coached the Oklahoma City Thunder back when Durant and Westbrook and James Harden were all rookies. Well, I mean, not rookies, but they were all young, like these guys are young. You get to be for part of that growth, and then somebody else steps in. Mark Jackson for the Warriors had Klay Thompson and Steph Curry when they were really young. But then Steve Kerr comes in, right? So I would think, whoever comes in understands there's a chance that they could get better, they could develop, and then somebody else has to come.
Yeah. No, that's it's going to be interesting to see. That's a really good point that, maybe this is a placeholder, right? If they do get, their top pick and Wembanyama, but maybe that's a good problem to have, I think, for all of us here in Detroit.
Oh, it would be great. I mean, because with all the rebuild stuff you're talking about and how people are just tired of the potential. And the funny thing is Wembanyama is not going to come in and be the MVP right away, right? So he'll need some time too. But wouldn't that be crazy to have that kind of,
in 3 or 4 years, he's going to be great.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. No, but to have that kind of interest, right? I mean, but look how it looks out. I mean, and we can talk about this as we get closer to the draft, especially if they win the lottery. But let me just make this last point. You got to take Victor Wembanyama if you win the lottery. No question. But it reminds me a little bit of, who knows what's going to happen with him? It reminds me a little bit with Zion Williamson a few years ago, who, if you remember, when he was at Duke, was the biggest college star of the last decade, right?
Yep.
And just a monster sort of his size, that athleticism, just the way he played, it was different. It looked different. It looked new. It's like, okay, here's the new sort of different kind of evolution of Charles Barkley or whatever. And you had to take him because of his star power. Whatever GM was going to have to take him because the owner of that franchise is like, there's no way you're not taking Zion Williamson. We're going to sell tickets, right? And John Morant Williamson hardly plays. He may eventually be better, but John Morant, was number 2 pick that year. You wonder, is there going to be a deal like this with this year? And again, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it's interesting to think about.
You never know. As our good friend Dave Burkett mentioned, and right after the Lions traded Jeff Okudah to the Falcons, like, it just tells you what a crapshoot any draft is, NFL or any draft. You just don't know the player himself, but also how he fits within the structure of that team. And if you're getting a really good player that high, you've got problems on your team. So yeah, it's going to be be interesting,
right?
Oh, for sure.
Unless you have somebody else's pick, like the Pistons did with Darko. Yeah. But it doesn't generally work out that way. All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll come right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. All right, we're going to get into the Tigers here because I guess we have to, because they play in Detroit, and we are.
Yeah, they're just just a little baseball team out there.
We're a newspaper for Detroit. No. They've already, speaking of rebuilds and potential and all that. Oh boy! But before we get there, real quickly, what have you thought of Isaiah Thomas's? I don't want to call it a redemption tour, but his history
Revenge tour. How about
revenge tour, history corrector tour. He likes to see himself as a truth dispenser, some kind of old sage who's trying to fix all the what he thinks is a revisionist history. Just he was on a podcast called All the Smoke that's run by former NBA players Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. And it was so long, I had to make it 2 parts. It was 3 hours. Each was about an hour and a half. I was like, oh my goodness. And I listened to it.
What is it with basketball people? The Last Dance has to be like 40 parts. This thing has to be 2. Why can't they just get their point across?
I know,
in one
and
shot?
you listen to it, and it's always everybody else's thing. It's Isaiah was such a great, great player, and it seems to me that there's some difficulty in it, just sort of being okay with being that great, great player. And I don't want to psychoanalyze too much, but that podcast was really something. In any case, obviously the biggest part of all this that's created so much news is the beef that he has with Michael Jordan, right? And Colin called him out in that podcast again. But just the petty things, like there was a anniversary of Jordan scored 55 or 56 at the Silverdome a couple of weeks ago. And somebody just tweeted the highlights. There's some basketball site just tweeted the highlights. Like, wow, wasn't this something? Isaiah retweets it with, let it be known that we won the title that year. You know what I mean? And we beat the Bulls in the playoffs. He had no reason to do that. It just, right? Anyway.
Isaiah's out in the weeds just waiting to pick somebody off on Twitter. That's, well, to be fair to Zeke, right? Charles Oakley starts it. He's on the podcast and he says, Jordan came into your city and took your city, meaning Chicago,
right?
And that's why you're really mad. He took over Chicago, and then Thomas fires back on Twitter. It's like, I remember us kicking your ass a lot. Someone please check my record as any team he played on. Sit down, be humble. Like, oh, it's just. I mean, and you know what? Hey, I will say this: like Isaiah was left off that '92 Dream Team, and that was a complete miscarriage of justice. That was so wrong.
It was.
When this happened, I didn't live in Detroit, and everybody thought it was wrong. I lived in LA. I was like, how can this happen? And this is just petty between Jordan and Thomas, and it was just wrong. Should he be mad about it still 30 years later? I don't know. I mean. You know what? And I hate to use a really big word, Sean, but hagiography. The kind of
the
overpouring overzealousness. Showering people with praise, kind of a thing. No, that's really pompous of me to use that word, but anyway, I think that's what he.
Wait a second.
That's what he bristles at.
Wait a second, please, humbly. It's no different than bibliography or biography or autobiography. It's the same thing. It's just
Go get 10 people anywhere you go, even in Smarty Pants, Ann Arbor, where you live. Go get 10 people on the street. Say
that's not the point. The point is it's just as specific a word, and it's just it shouldn't be it shouldn't be considered all that fancy. Anyway, go. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, hegemony coming in a Sean Windsor column at you soon. No, I like it. I like looking up words, and I read.
That's not a word I would use, actually.
Yeah. Oh, it's coming. No, but that's the whole thing. It's just the pettiness and Isaiah, bristling, I think, at all this Jordan adoration. And honestly, there's a movie that just came out about the shoe, the Air Jordan, and all that, and Sonny Vaccaro and all that stuff. So Phil Knight, which I'll probably see. But anyway, you kind of get tired of it. I could imagine, and especially if you're one of his biggest rivals in his era, it's got to be tiresome, right? To have to hear that and all this stuff. And I don't blame him, but going public with it as often as he can is all kind of a different level. But I love it. It's great.
No, it's really, I'm just trying. I mean, he's done this on and off over the years, but I don't recall a time where it's just been so concentrated into a few weeks, right? It's just one thing after another. Yeah, he's definitely on a petty tour, right? I mean, there's no question. And before the last thing I'll say, this is not the last word, though. You have the last word. The last thing I'll say is that I think it still mostly works for this region because what he feels and that chip on his shoulder. I mean, this guy was one of the best players who's ever played the game, and after Magic and and Bird, probably the third best player of that early part of the generation before Jordan sort of ascended. But he represents our area and the city in particular to some degree, right? I mean, he does that because I think a lot of people around here who love basketball feel like that Bad Boys team doesn't get remembered as it should. And it's funny because Isaiah Thomas talked about how the team is the most misunderstood team in the history of basketball. He said that on the podcast. And I was arguing about this with the great Vinny Goodwill the other day, actually, former Detroit News Pistons writers and national basketball writer now. And he thought they were, but I thought they were completely understood when they were playing. I just think I knew what he meant, though. I think they're misremembered. Right? I think that we forget just how good they were and how skilled they were and how ahead of their time they were in certain aspects. The guard, the stretch big, the guard play, all this sort of thing. And a wing dominant.
They couldn't have existed in today's NBA. I mean, you can't breathe on people now. So
they could because they were so skilled offensively. I mean, of course they could have. They would have different issues with big lumbering bigs, like a lot of those teams back in those days, stepping out and guarding pick and rolls and all that. But that's a different story. But anyway, yeah. That to me, I think Thomas, even though he may not be doing it in his soul for this city, it's still for him. I think the fact that he's doing it, it feels like to a lot of people he's doing it for this city, and I think that still probably resonates.
He's probably not, but yeah, that's it does resonate. He's the guy sticking up for the Bad Boys, and the Bad Boys are, I mean, is there any team that has had such a clear identity that has resonated with our community in our lifetimes? Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, you can't. I mean, even the production line of the 50s, you know, with the Red Wings, I mean, everybody's dead now who watched those teams play.
The 68 Tigers team, but that was more timing and place and the context of history at that point, right?
Yeah.
And not
but there was no identity. Yeah,
right.
And even with the 84 Tigers, the Red Wings, you know, the grind line, whatever, you know, I mean, but there was not the Bad Boy. I mean, the Bad Boys, and like I said, national perspective, I did not live here when the Bad Boys were playing, but they were awesome. I mean, to me, they were on the level of the Fab Five, you know, that such an iconic team for the ages in all of sports, not just basketball. I mean, people just, it resonates. You say Bad Boys, everybody knows exactly who you're talking about. As great as fun as the going to work, you know, crew was, they'll never be the Bad Boys. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, and the documentary about him was great, and you know, all that stuff. I mean, it's Daddy Rich. I mean, you can't just go on and on with this team. I mean,
it's true. I mean, their coach was the coach of the Dream Team, right? It's just with his own nickname and. Yeah, they were something, and they were a cultural force, and a lot of people didn't like them, but they tuned in because they wanted to see them outside of this area.
Yeah. And it was a team that was you loved to see them because they were fun, whatever. But you hated them because of Mahorn and Lambier and Thugs and whatever.
Right. And then Isaiah got lumped into that too, right? And I think I think to some degree Isaiah, it's not just the Jordan beef. I think to some degree Isaiah Thomas is chasing that time before the Bad Boys when he was as beloved about as anybody. You know, he was right behind Magic and Bird in terms of one of the most beloved players in the league. And I mean, I remember watching him before I moved to Michigan in first time I moved to Michigan, it was in 87. And I loved watching Isaiah, and anybody I knew that loved basketball where I was living, they loved watching the Pistons because of him. They were an up and down show then, right? They didn't defend much. Had Kelly Tripucka and all these other guys. But Isaiah was the way he handled the ball, the skill, right? I mean, he was different.
It's amazing
and beloved in that smile, and that's what he was known for. And I think
it was fake. Everybody else in the league says it was
for
fake.
Sure. But at that point, the public didn't think that. And I think once the Bad Boys happened, especially toward the end of the Bad Boys, it changed. And sometimes I wonder if he's chasing that time when he was truly, truly beloved and a superstar in a different kind of way. I don't know.
Maybe, but if I were Isaiah, I'd be very happy to be part of one of these, amazing teams, iconic teams that will forever be remembered. I mean, the Bulls will be remembered just for it being Jordan. Those are not iconic teams. The teams. he was iconic. He was amazing.
Well,
Him and Pippen.
and Phil,
That's all it was.
and Jackson, right? So you think of that coach almost as much as anybody.
Phil Jackson.
After those two players, the next person you think about is the coach.
Yeah,
right?
But there was no identity with that team. There was
the
just
triangle,
great.
Right? But who cares about that, right?
Who cares? Nobody cares. They didn't have if you don't have a cool nickname, you're not an iconic team. You know, you can be great, but you aren't necessarily an iconic team. You know, Showtime with the Lakers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of stuff. So, he should be happy with that. But he's got a chip on his shoulder. You know, can't get a head coaching job or GM job, whatever. You know, and there's probably something in the background, around the league that he doesn't like with his reputation. And I just want to see more of it. That's all I ask for Isaiah Thomas is more. Maybe you can get Joe D to come out on Twitter with him.
I would prefer that he do it in June or July when
we need stuff to write.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was joking with our editor about that. I'm like, oh man, this is good. And we know, and people did read it. We knew people were going to read it because it's Isaiah Thomas, and you just don't see very many players doing what he just did the last couple of weeks. You just don't sit down and be humble. We beat your ass, right? You just don't see that very much. So, but I was joking. I'm like, God, why didn't he wait a month to do it?
There'll be more
to do this. But in any case, all right. We're going to, I'm sure, get into the Tigers as we go through the next month or so, as much as people can handle. But just your initial thoughts on this. What are they, 2-8 at this point? They lost, as of this recording, they lost 9-3, was it, to Toronto? And they had another injury. I shouldn't say another injury. It just seems like it. As a carryover from last year. Their pitcher, Matt Manning, broke a bone in his hand. Or no, his foot on a comebacker.
Yep.
Sorry. And who knows how long he's going to be out. But, had some opportunities early in the game, then lost. It's just sort of the story. They can't hit. Their starting pitching is, what it is. The bullpen is obviously not great. What say you, man? I know it's early. It's just been, 11 games?
10 games. It feels like 11 or maybe more.
They've only won 2. You're right. Sorry, 2-8. 2-8. Yeah.
2-8. Well, that projects out to 34 wins this year. And I think you had them going to the wild card or playing game or something.
I didn't pick them. I wasn't very high on their prospects.
How many wins? I picked 69 wins.
I want to say in the 60s. In the 60s somewhere.
You did not pick in the 60s. You picked in the mid 70s probably. Anyway, it's going worse than we thought. It feels like the plane's going right into the side of the mountain. They're not even going to try to get around it. What's that old line? I forget the coach's line, and I think it was a football line, but the Tigers version is, we can't hit, but we're making up for it by not being able to pitch too.
Yeah.
So the starting pitchers can't throw strikes. The Tigers have no pop. Baez is down to 5th in the order as of yesterday on when they started this series and
plummeting,
in Toronto.
Right?
I'm sorry?
And plummeting.
And probably plummeting. Austin Meadows having, more personal issues, taking a leave. It's just not going great. I mean, Torkelson at least is hitting a little bit. He's not nosediving like he did last year at the beginning of the season. So maybe there's a little bit of hope. I liked he played well defensively last year at first base. I think that guy has a chance to be a Gold Glover at first base. I really like how he plays the position. Matt Bierling, the right fielder, who they got in a trade with the Phillies, I believe it was. He's been good. He's been, leading off, and now he's hitting, I think, 3rd in the lineup. So there's a little bit of promise there. But as a team, it's not going great. And I said it. I wrote it that in our little predictions, whatever, I said the Tigers and the A's are going to be fighting for the worst, team in baseball all season long. I think the Royals will even be better. So I don't know. And it was first they lose to the Rays, right? They get swept in Tampa, but then it turns out Tampa's going to go 162-0. Apparently, they're never going to lose. And then they win the series 2 out of 3 in Houston. Oh, World Series champs. That's really encouraging, And then they come home and then they get, swept by Boston at home.
And not the best Red Sox team either, right?
They're not they're not even expected really to make the playoffs. They're maybe a 500 team. So, so it's like back and forth. And now they're in Toronto. And it's just not. I don't think anybody had high expectations for this team.
No.
But this is not. And the worrisome part about it is, which is Scott Harris, the team, president, is never going to say this, but his whole thing has been, we got to dominate the strike zone, pitching wise, hitting wise. They got to be, throw strikes, and also be judicious about pitches that they go after. But how long is that going to take, because it doesn't happen right away, coming from his previous stop or his place where he was, came up through baseball in San Francisco. I don't think it happened right away from them. And then they got it from the Dodgers, and it didn't happen right away for the Dodgers either. So it takes probably more than a season to, really push that through your organization, from all the lower levels up into the big leagues, to get that philosophy down, with all the hitting coaches, with all the pitching coaches, with all the development, with all the everything. So this is not a team that, I think anybody thought was going to catch fire necessarily, and it's early, Sean. I know you love potential, but what do you think? Is there any hope? Because in my experience, you don't get any healthier as baseball goes on. And the Manning thing is kind of a freak thing, like who can control that? But you could almost, I didn't see him say this, but I read the comments, and he's like, I don't have time for this stuff, and he needs to develop. And you could almost, I think he was saying, I'll be back in 5 days. And I have to think that way. It's like a young guy on the cusp of having a potentially good major league career, so how angry must you be that this kind of weird freak thing happens to you? And he said it didn't even feel like a broken bone right away. It just felt like a bruise or whatever it might be. But is there any salvation for this team? What can they win enough or show enough potential to get Sean Windsor to come to his second baseball game this season?
I'll come to a few games, but no, I don't think there's going to be. I mean, to me, the best you can hope for is that the two young hitters show something, right? I mean, it's funny when we say potential. What are we really talking about? I mean, in order to say that and say, boy, this person has this kind of ceiling, or you wouldn't want to put a ceiling on, or what's the floor, whatever. I know all those silly things we talk about, but
God, I hate that. I hate the stupid ceiling and floor things. Go ahead.
But potential is, you've got to see something. We were talking about the Pistons earlier with Ivy and Duran. What did we see? We saw Jaden Ivey start taking over games the last month, right, at times, and doing things that we didn't know he could do. He actually did them. Same with Jalen Duran. That's the thing. When you have to see that. So for Torkelson and Riley Green, we got to see them get hot for 12 days, 10 days, whatever, right? We haven't seen that yet. We got to see them start spraying the ball around or whatever, using their bat in a different way, just kind of figuring out how to play cat and mouse with the pitcher a little bit better. I mean, obviously the defense, you mentioned Torkelson's defense, Green looks pretty good in center field too. That we've seen at least some, but we need to see, they have to do it. They don't have to do it for a whole season. To me, that's where you say potential. But if they do it for stretches and then fall off and then do it for another stretch, that's when you can say, okay, now you can start to believe that there might be something. You know what I mean? To me, that's what potential is. To me, that I think the fan base would be fairly okay if they saw something from the two guys that are supposed to carry the middle of the lineup for the next decade. You know what I mean?
No, that you're definitely right. I mean, that's those are guys who are going to be, you think, the key. They're part of the key to what's going to happen. But I'll give you my Dodgers example of, I think that you can have some really good young players. You can have people like, Corey Seager, Cody Bellinger, these guys, right?
I mean, really
Bellinger, good players.
Like,
but that doesn't mean they're going to be there for a decade. They play well. They don't exactly measure up, and then you let them go. You trade them, you let them go in free agency, whatever it is. You have to constantly be churning that roster. You can't just expect that you're going to hold these guys here forever. So they're part of the puzzle, but I think if Scott Harris is the GM, whatever team president, and I think he's going to be, and if he's going to follow the Giants model and the Dodgers model, you're not going to keep your guys around forever. I mean, even the great Justin Verlander wasn't kept around. He was dealt at some point. So you have to be willing to churn that roster. But these guys for now, I wouldn't care. I mean, to me, they can have a good season. They can show promise, and I think that's what this season is going to be about more. But to me, it's how do you fill out the roster? How do you find guys like Matt Vierling? You know, how do you identify these players who can be contributors? Because you don't really need it in baseball. I mean, you're up at the plate, and yeah, it helps to have some protection in the order and all this other stuff. But you are who you are at the plate. You know, that's not going to change a whole lot. You may see a few better pitches if Derek Jeter's hitting behind you or whatever, or Aaron Judge, but you got to do it on your own. So I would like to see what they're going to do, and obviously they're going to be sellers this year. Already. I mean, nobody ever had a question about that. But how is this roster going to be filled out? How is Hinch going to get the most out of these guys and not let these things just, cascade and the teams not being competitive? How is he going to manage the bullpen? The bullpen has a lot of questions. He seems like he's just going to be rolling guys out there, and nobody has a really specific role at this point. So I think this season's going to be all about how this team grows, figuring things out, hopefully seeing some development from the younger players, but finding contributors out there that maybe you can hold on to beyond the season, and then taking that next step, next year, and see where the prospects come in next year too. But it's just I don't think anybody expected a 2-8 after 10 games.
No, they didn't. But getting back to your Dodgers, I mean, they had a couple of guys come up. Well, they had some pitching too, but a couple of guys come up and pop, and that's what you got to have. I mean, yeah, you could go out and fill it out. You can get some free agents and make trades and so forth. But these days, you need a couple of guys to come up and pop. And I think, and I don't know if Green and Torkelson are going to be those two guys or not, but we're talking about what the fan base wants to see, what they're going to be. They want to see a couple of the young guys show that they're going to be around, and they may not. They don't have to be here for 10 years, but 5, 6, 7. Yeah, obviously you could trade them and maybe get a better player, and it works that way too. But it's just been a while since they've had somebody that can hit, right? That's coming up. I think that's a fun process for the fans. I think the same thing with Skubal when he comes back later this year, because he showed a lot right before he got hurt. And be curious to see where he is. That would be fun for fans if he came back and every fifth game, you're in a game because he's that good. I don't know if he'll be that good again, but who knows?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And they got some pitchers on the injury list, and I think Michael Lorenzen. I've kind of followed his career since he was in college, and I think he'll be a nice little addition if he stays healthy. Good veteran arm. Probably trade bait at some point, but yeah, there's some there may be some help on the way, right? At least for the starting pitching. So. Hopefully there's going to be ebbs and flows, and maybe this is their early ebb. Maybe they can straighten things out. It hasn't been, the one thing with the Tigers is it hasn't been wholly without promise. So it's doesn't look good, but they didn't start the season 0-10. There's been a little bit of a glimmer of hope with the Astros series. So maybe they can find a team at home.
Listen to you finding the love in a 2-8 start. What is happening?
Peddling the hope. I've been reading too much Sean Windsor, man. Too much Sean Windsor.
What's going on with you? You can only do that if I don't know. I still think it's hard to get your head around the fact that in our professional sports landscape, the Lions are the ones that everybody's turning to. I mean, it's just, isn't that funny? For so long, it was the winter teams, or the 0-3. Or the Tigers, who had a lot of success over a period. What's that?
Wait till the Lions start 0-3.
If that, yeah. Oh God, I know. All these poor people. watch them do that. Anyway, all right. We need to take one more quick break and get back to finish this up, get you out of here, and hear what your favorite thing's all about. We'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. It's that time of the show, Carlos. It's time for you to talk about how bitter you are that baseball doesn't quite have the same cultural place in this landscape. No, it's not. It's time for you to share something that you want to share that means something to you.
Yeah, this is had some time off over the Easter break, and went to see some family out in Erie, Pennsylvania, home of the Seawolves, Tigers AA team. And it was nice. We got to see some nephews and nieces and their families, the young kids. And I hadn't been there, COVID and other issues, for almost 2 years. I hadn't been able to get together with them at a big family thing like that. And the nice thing was everybody there is a golf fan. So we were watching the Masters and the kids were running around. And I forgot how much I missed that. Being around family and the craziness and dogs and kids and all that stuff. And I'm not like you, Sean. I don't just, watch TV all day long and watch every sports highlight and everything. So I actually don't watch that much TV or sports on TV. So it
Why
was
would
nice
you?
to
You're
have
just
that.
a sports writer.
I know. I got other stuff to do apparently sometimes. But yeah. So it was fun to do that. It was fun to just hang out and watch your boy Jon Rahm, who you call the quintessential American golfer, although he's Spanish, win the Masters. So it was very enjoyable.
That's an unusual swing.
It's a little.
It's not like Furyk or anything, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a little unorthodox. But it was fun to spend that time with the family again.
Well, that's awesome. My favorite thing is it's 70 degrees and started to green up just a touch. I don't know if I've seen maybe a couple of buds here and there, but I don't know if that should be my favorite thing because it's, feels great. It's a little unsettling to have this kind of warmth so early in April. I mean, it seems like the last several Aprils I can count on at least one snowfall. Not a big snow, but you usually look this time of the year. How many times do you remember going outside in April, like mid-April, and the grass is just starting to green a little bit, and there's snow, all right, and there are little green grass blades popping up through the snow, and you're like, I can't believe there's snow out there. The grass is already starting to green, and you fall for it, and every year it happens. Well, this year it's not. I don't want to think about the reasons why. I don't want to know why we just had the mildest winter I can remember in my adult life, other than some, crazy ice storms and that one heavy wet snowfall we had that tore down all the trees all over town. But yeah, so look, we don't want to get into that. I'm just grateful to have some nice warmth. That's my favorite thing, because dude, when you have this a little bit, you know how it is in Michigan. I was driving downtown last night, Ann Arbor, to get a little carry out from a taco place. Was it?
It's Taco Bell.
Yeah, it was Taco Bell.
Let's go ahead and say it.
Yeah,
it's
Taco Bell. Yeah, no, I wanted the whitest tacos possible, and
that's Chipotle.
Yeah, is that Chipotle? Oh my God, I guess I'm even pastier than I thought. But there were people out everywhere. It sounds different than it does when it's July or August and you're used to it. It's striking all of a sudden to hear all this activity on the street when it warms up like this after not hearing it for so long. And anyway, that's my favorite thing.
Well, that's funny you said that. I had a dentist appointment yesterday on Tuesday, and it was a beautiful day, obviously. And I get there and we had a bunch of cancellations. Apparently, people want to just go out and enjoy the weather, want to sit in the dentist chair for an hour or whatever it is. So I'm sure that's part of it. Is everybody's out.
Yeah, no, you get out of the car.
Around.
Yeah, last night it was 9:00, whatever. You get out of the car and it's like, what is that sound? Oh, that's just human beings that are out and about, right? Yeah, it's kind of funny. Anyway, all right, we need to get you out of here. That's I'm glad you got to spend time with your family. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. And I'll see you soon, I hope, at some point. Maybe at a ball game. Maybe as the Red Wings clean out their locker room here pretty soon or something. In any case, we need to think. Yeah, right. No. dressing room.
Put their sweaters away in the dressing room.
Nobody says sweaters. Nobody says
Hockey
sweaters.
people do.
No,
Hockey.
even they don't. I mean, do they?
I'm going to report you to Gritty.
Oh, why don't you keep going and say fa instead of faux? You're one of those folks, aren't you?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. We need
Who
to
do we
thank
need to
people.
thank? Let's thank
Robin Chan.
Robin Chan, or
Do we need to
our
thank anybody
producer?
else besides Robin Chan?
We better thank
No,
two
we
other
don't.
people. Kirkland
Who?
Crawford, our executive editor and producer, and Anjanette Delgado, our executive producer and interim editor at the Free Press. But mostly, Sean, the fans and the reader or the listeners.
The
readers and listeners are probably
I
the
don't
same
know if
thing,
they're,
right?
they're not fans. I
If
mean,
you're
they're-
listening, you're reading. Come on. Who's not reading if you're listening?
No,
to
that's
this
true. We want to
dribble?
thank you. Yeah, thanks for spending time with us. You can find us, Carlos, at wherever you find your favorite podcast, Spotify, Apple. Once you get there, subscribe, rate us, let us know what you think. And I don't know. We'll be back, won't we? I think, maybe.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Hopefully.
One of these days.
Yeah, no, it's always fun to hang out. All right, let's get you out of here. Thank you again for spending some time with us. We'll be back next week with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean.